New Zealand's got a pest problem. Native animals and plants are under threat by introduced animals like this Trichoceros vulpecula.
Possum.
And Erinaceus europaeus.
Hedgehog.
So with the help of science, we're hoping to help control these introduced animals that are a threat to our native wildlife. And look after animals like Hemidana thoracica.
Witter.
What do you think he's doing?
I think he's like waiting for someone to tickle his armpit.
Give it a go.
Well, we're waiting for the next stage. I'm a marine biologist. I actually don't work on exotic mammals. But that's sometimes the ridiculous thing about science is that you're pushed into commenting it, or at least representing science in areas that you're not an expert in, and that sort of reiterates some of what you've heard before. Thank you. So my time's been truncated, so I'll try to keep this as brief as possible. Does anybody know what these are? Come on, fish larvae of snapper. Okay, so very early on when I was at parties or at dinner parties or whatever it might be, has anyone seen that expression on people's faces when you start telling them what you do? You know, I'm a marine scientist, and they all want to know what you do. Oh, that sounds so fascinating. I pretty soon realised they weren't really interested in the development of the preopercular spines in a fish larva, or the hypura plate and what size the fish larva is when it actually bends over. But that's my initial background, that was my initial expertise. But what that developed into was being able to use fish larvae for not just developing phylogenies of species, but also use them for ecological questions like designing of marine reserves and using fish larvae, which is the dispersal phase of fishes, as models for transfer of propagules from one area to another. And I could explain that quite simply. I'm not doing a very good job tonight, but I'm under a bit of time pressure. to my friends and colleagues, and all of a sudden they realised the significance of these sorts of research activities to their life. And that's when I started realising, it took quite a few years early in my career, that the stories I was telling these people, or the way I was telling them about my research, had to relate to their experience and their knowledge. And a lot of the friends I had, at least, weren't necessarily science literate. I needed to explain it to them in a means that made sense to them. And even a lot of the people that I interacted with as a science, particularly working in the field, I was meeting people that I was working in their front yards on a lakefront, and I had to explain to them what I was doing in a very simple manner for them to sort of accept that I was working on the beach just out the front of their place. And it was important for me to be able to sell my story to them in a very, very short period of time. Probably, since working in museums, what we're all about is communicating our research or our activities to a broad audience. And probably the most successful thing that I've done here at the Auckland Museum, that I've been there in the last 5 years, is this Kermadec blog. This was an expedition that I led in May last year. It was the largest ever biodiversity expedition to the Kermadec Islands, and I knew the privilege that I had, and the team that came with me, of working in this very remote area that very few people would be able to get to. But I also realised that it would be an attractive story for people who are interested in science. And through the blog and through the assistance of a great science communicator, Alison Balance, who some of you may know from Our Changing World, but also some dedicated people at the museum who could support it, this was an incredibly successful campaign and was followed religiously by a large number of people, and we even won an international award for the Webbing Museums, I think it was, at an international conference for this particular blog. The reason we set this up, I knew I couldn't feed this because my goal, I had 2 weeks to do as much research as I could. I couldn't feed this. I actually paid for the science communicator to come on board with us, and I paid for her berth, and also had the support of the staff at the museum to actually moderate the communications coming from our remote area through the satellite phone through the museum's website, etc. So it worked really well. And other sorts of things that we do is, or what we're developing right now, and it's going to be released before Christmas, is this Marine Life app. We're developing a guide to marine life of New Zealand's foreshore, We're focusing on the northern part of New Zealand at the moment, and it's being developed from, we've reskinned this app that's been developed by the Museum of Victoria with the Auckland Museum stuff, but it's also going to include Auckland region animals. And the idea is to basically give people a guide that they can download on their portable device and use to identify what they're seeing on the beaches. So the take-home message, my elevator pitch is know your audience, know the language you've got to speak to them in, and be able to tell them briefly and succinctly what you do and why it's important to them.
Great. Thank you, Tom.